He only asked for a glass of water to escape the rain, not to cause a scene. But the stares, the laughter, and the slammed door told him exactly what they saw. Just another homeless man. No one noticed the limp in his step or the weight of the duffel bag that carried more than just worn clothes. It held a purple heart and a folded flag. No one knew who he was until the next morning when 5 military trucks sealed off the entire street and the troops stepped out in full uniform. This isn't just a story about a soldier, it's about what happens when an entire brotherhood rises. Let's begin. The rain came suddenly, like a memory Raymond Miller had spent years trying to forget, cold, relentless, and without warning. He hadn't intended to stop at the cafe on 61st. He usually went out of his way to avoid places like that. Polished, modern, brimming with people who avoided eye contact and smelled faintly of cologne and ambition. Places that reminded him how far he'd fallen from who he used to be. But the downpour left him no choice. His spine, a brittle rad map of pain after 2 combat surgeries and countless nights on the streets, couldn't take another step without shelter. The fashionable cafe was the only nearby refuge within his walking radius. He didn't expect warmth, only a corner where he could rest his legs and let the storm pass. He stood at the entrance, dripping. Rainwater slid from the brim of his frayed army cap, carving rivulets down his gray beard. His jacket, once a military issue, now bore 1,000 scars of time and weather. Slung over his shoulder was an old duffel bag, olive green, straps fraying like nerves, heavy with everything he owned and everything he couldn't leave behind. As he stepped inside, the warmth hit him like a ghost of another life. Wooden floors polished to a sheen, golden lighting, the smell of cinnamon pastries and high-end coffee beans. Laptops hummed softly at every table, their owners cocooned in wireless sanctuaries. Raymond's boots squelched softly with each step. Heads turned, not many, but enough. He kept his eyes down and chose a small table in the farthest corner, closest to the window, farthest from judgment. A barista with gelled hair and an expensive watch approached. His apron was spotless, his tone wasn't. "Can I help you?" the young man asked, but what he meant was, "Why are you here?" "Just a water, please," Raymond said softly, his voice edged with gravel, "until the rain slows." The barista's eyes narrowed, scanning the soaked fabric of his jacket, the battered duffel bag, and the silence that hung around Raymond like fog. "There's a minimum purchase for seating," he said, his smile thin and professional. "This isn't a shelter." Raymond nodded slowly, his fingers curling around the edge of the table. His knuckles were swollen from arthritis, joints long since surrendered to time and war. "I can manage a small coffee," he said. He pulled 3 crumpled dollar bills from his pocket and set them on the table. Nearly half of what he had left for the week. The barista didn't move. He stared at the bills, then back at Raymond. "That won't cover anything we serve here." His voice was louder now, enough that 2 customers nearby paused their scrolling. Raymond felt the old heat rise behind his ribs. Shame, hard and bitter. He hadn't come for pity, just a place to wait. "No purchase, no seat," the barista repeated. "This ain't a shelter." A hush fell over the cafe. Conversations faltered, laughter faded, and for one long, breathless moment, the only sound was the soft hiss of milk steaming behind the counter and the tapping of rain on the windows. Raymond stood slowly, every vertebra resisted. He reached for his bag, the leather strap groaning as he lifted it. "I'll wait under the awning," he murmured. As he turned to leave, a man near the door wrinkled his nose and muttered just loud enough for the room to hear, "He stinks, can't you smell that?" A ripple of laughter followed, soft, cruel. Raymond didn't flinch. He didn't glare or defend himself. He bent to lift the bag, carefully, with the reverence of a man touching something sacred. But the barista stepped forward, impatient. "I need you to leave now. You're disturbing the customers." He grabbed Raymond's arm, not hard, but sudden. The movement unbalanced him. His foot slipped on the wet floor. The bag fell. The sound echoed, canvas slamming on concrete. A few patrons gasped, Something spilled from inside, bouncing once, then coming to rest near a polished shoe. A purple heart. The small metal lay under the cafe's perfect lighting, its purple core catching the glow like a secret revealed. Next to it, a plastic sleeve housing a folded American flag peeked out. For a moment, the entire room froze. A woman across the room stared, coffee cup halfway to her lips. She blinked, then looked away. No one moved. The barista glanced at the metal, then used the toe of his shoe to shove it, careless, like it was just trash. He picked up the bag and thrust it at Raymond. "Take your stuff and go." Raymond knelt slowly, painfully. He picked up the metal himself, thumb brushing the edges of its ribbon before tucking it back inside a mesh pouch with the tenderness of a father handling a child. Not one person offered to help. He stepped back into the rain, which hadn't lessened. It poured down harder now, soaking his boots, tracing his spine, washing over him like erasure. The door clicked shut behind him with a soft finality. And inside the cafe, everything returned to normal. The rain was relentless, each drop falling like a cold slap, as if the world itself was reminding him where he belonged. Raymond stood beneath the cafe's awning, which did little to shield him. His jacket was already soaked through. Water crept down the collar, soaked into the cuffs, and filled his shoes until his socks felt like sponges. But it wasn't the rain that chilled him. It was the silence. Behind the glass, the barista returned to his duties. Laptops flickered back on, conversations resumed, and Raymond was already forgotten. He had once led soldiers into the fire. Now he was barely a shadow outside a coffee shop window. After 20 minutes, his body stiff and spine aflame, Raymond shifted the duffel on his shoulder and limped away. The pain was like glass under his skin with each step. The nearest park was 2 blocks away. He counted every footfall, gritting his teeth against the ache, refusing to stop. The park was empty, washed clean by the storm. Playground swings moved aimlessly in the wind. Puddles pooled under the gazebo where he finally found shelter. The roof creaked with the weight of rain, but it was dry. Dry enough. He set his duffel down in the corner and unzipped it with slow, practiced movements. The bag was his only constant, his home, his history, his burden. Inside, everything was organized the way soldiers organized chaos, precisely. First, he checked the mesh pouch. His fingers trembled, not from age, but from the sharp stab of memory that accompanied what he was about to touch. The Purple Heart, warded after a mission that went sideways in Afghanistan. A helicopter was downed, a perimeter compromised, extraction failed. He'd carried 3 wounded men through rocky terrain under enemy fire, each step tearing at his back until he could barely breathe. He hadn't noticed the blood on his uniform until after the last man was safe. The metal was still intact. The ribbon was slightly frayed, but the metal shone, its heart-shaped body cradling the bust of George Washington, a symbol of injury and honor in one. He held it for a long time, letting it anchor him. Then came the flag, folded with military precision, encased in a plastic sleeve. It had been draped over his best friend's coffin, Private First Class Mike Daniels, before his widow mailed it to Raymond with a short note. "He'd want you to have it. You were more family to him than we ever were." Raymond remembered the heat of that day, the gunfire, the sound Mike made when he fell. He'd carried him out too, though it hadn't mattered. Some injuries no field medic could fix. Next came the photograph. 12 men, arms slung around each other in front of a sandblasted transport chopper. Dust in the air, smiles on faces hardened by deployment. Only 5 had made it home. The glass in the frame was cracked, but he ran his thumb over the faces as if touching them would bring them back. They were boys then, soldiers, brothers. Now, just ghosts in his duffel bag. At the very bottom, protected by all else, was an envelope his daughter's handwriting. Sophia wrote to him once a month. The letters were polite and careful, as though she were writing to a stranger she'd been told to respect. Their relationship had never recovered after his return. PTSD had built invisible walls between them, walls made of nightmares, broken promises, and long silences. She had resented his absence during childhood, and he'd never found the words to explain the war he carried home with him. Still, she wrote, that had to mean something. He didn't open the letter now. Some things were easier left unread when the weight of the day was already too much. A sound behind him broke the stillness. "Ray, that you?" Raymond turned, hand instinctively reaching toward the duffel. A figure emerged from the raincoat, heavy, moving carefully. A shopping cart full of bundled belongings stood parked just outside the gazebo. "Charlie?" Raymond's voice cracked with recognition. The man stepped closer, favoring one leg. "Alpha 9, I thought that was you. Been a long time." Raymond offered a tired nod. "Too long." Charlie sat beside him, groaning as his joints settled. "You stopped showing up to the VA group. Lost the apartment, hard to make meetings when you're sleeping under bridges." Charlie didn't flinch. He knew, they all knew, programs existed, sure, but they didn't catch everyone, especially not the ones who kept quiet. "You still in touch with your girl?" Raymond shook his head. "She's in college, doing well, doesn't need to know." Charlie frowned. "She doesn't know?" "No," Raymond said firmly. "She's building her own life. I won't be her burden." Charlie didn't argue. Some choices were sacred among them. Protect the people you love, sometimes by staying away. Raymond's phone buzzed, an old flip model held together with tape. He rarely turned it on, only for emergencies. A notification flashed. Someone had uploaded a video, title, "Homeless Veteran," so watch this freeloader get served. There was even commentary over it, mocking, dismissive. He clicked, and there he was, staggering backward, the duffel falling, the Purple Heart hits the floor, freeze-framed humiliation turned into a spectacle. Thousands of views, comments, emojis, hate. He closed it with shaking hands. Across the city, in a suburban home, David Harrison watched the same video. He was in a Zoom meeting, only half listening when the algorithm suggested it. He clicked out of boredom and froze. "Sergeant Miller?" The room fell silent around him as he stood, the screen forgotten. His prosthetic leg covered by tailored slacks moved stiffly as he walked out of the meeting. He remembered every step Raymond had carried him, every bullet that had flown over them, the pain, the blood, and the man who refused to leave anyone behind. He picked up the phone. "Marcus," he said into the receiver, "it's David. Have you seen what they did to Sergeant Miller?" Night fell slowly over the city, the rain finally tapering to a whisper. The streetlights blinked on, casting long shadows across the empty park. Raymond remained in the gazebo, back pressed against the wooden post, arms wrapped tightly around his duffel bag. The cold had seeped into his bones, but it wasn't the kind of cold that could be solved by blankets or coffee. It was deeper, the kind that settled inside a man when the world stopped seeing him. He clutched the Purple Heart like a talisman hidden beneath his coat, close to his chest. Not because of pride. Pride had long since been worn down by years of silence and survival. No, he held it close because it reminded him of who he once was, when his name meant something and when his actions saved lives, not startled baristas. He hadn't always lived like this. There was a time he'd had an apartment, not fancy but warm, with a real bed and a door that locked. There was a time when Sophia would call him on weekends, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying, but always calling. But after a string of missed rent payments and an eviction notice, that fragile stability shattered like glass. He hadn't told her. He didn't know how. He remembered the last phone call. She had asked if he was okay, and he'd said, "I'm exploring some new neighborhoods." A half-truth designed to sound brave. Now, neighborhoods meant shelters, park benches, and bus terminals. He ran a hand over his beard and felt the sharp edge of stubble. He couldn't remember the last time he'd looked in a mirror. Maybe that was why the barista hadn't seen a man, only a problem. In the distance, a siren wailed. Somewhere, a dog barked. Life kept moving, and Raymond sat still. The sounds reminded him of Afghanistan. Not the gunfire or explosions, those were unforgettable, yes, but it was the small things, the hum of radio static, the weight of silence after an ambush, the sound of boots over dry gravel. They'd all been so young. He pulled out the photograph again. The 12 of them, some with wide grins, others with wary smiles, arms slung over shoulders, a group of brothers who had laughed through hell because there was no other way to survive it. Only 5 came back. Of the 5, 2 were dead now. 1 overdose, 1 suicide. The war had followed them home, a shadow that crept under every door. Raymond had survived, but survival didn't mean peace. He'd tried the VA, tried therapy, even tried writing down what he couldn't say out loud. But nothing stuck. Nothing held. He was a soldier without orders, a protector without anyone left to protect. That's when the quiet started to feel like home. He tucked the photo away and reached for Sophia's letter. He hadn't read this one yet. He always waited until the moment he needed it most. He traced her handwriting on the envelope, imagining her bent over a desk in some college dorm room. The same determined furrow in her brow he remembered from when she was 7 and insisted on tying her own shoes. He didn't open the letter, not yet. Just holding it was enough tonight. His back throbbed, a constant pulse beneath the skin. He shifted on the bench, trying to find a position that didn't hurt. It didn't exist. Charlie had already curled up on the other side of the gazebo, using his coat as a blanket. The man's breathing was shallow but steady. Another veteran trying to outlast the night. Raymond stared out at the park. Trees lined the path like quiet sentinels. Water still dripped from their leaves, catching the moonlight in tiny bursts. The city had a way of swallowing people. And yet, something in him refused to disappear completely. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the damn metal pressed to his chest. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the letters. Sophia's words, reminding him he still mattered to someone, even if she didn't fully understand what he'd endured. His flip phone buzzed again. This time, he didn't check it. Let the world say what it would. He had no interest in watching strangers dissect his pain for entertainment. What he didn't know was that elsewhere online, in private groups and encrypted messages, another kind of storm was gathering. In living rooms across the country, veterans were watching the same video, not with laughter, with fury. David Harrison had already made calls to men Raymond had carried, to comrades who owed their lives to Alpha 9. Names scattered across different states, former Marines, medics, officers, engineers. No one needed convincing. "We owe him," David had said, and that was enough. Phones lit up in garages, basements, and barracks. Plans formed, uniforms retrieved from closets, combat boots dusted off. What happened to Raymond Miller might have been ignored by the world, but not by them. Raymond didn't know any of that yet. He just knew he was tired. He leaned back, folded his arms over his chest, and listened to the sound of the city, the wind through the trees, the distant hum of traffic, the faint echo of laughter from some far-off rooftop. And for just a moment, he imagined what it would feel like to come home, not just physically, but truly home, to a space where he didn't have to explain, didn't have to prove anything. He looked down at the Purple Heart resting in his lap. He hadn't earned it for being a hero, he earned it for surviving what most couldn't. And somehow, despite everything, he was still here. Raymond woke at dawn, just as he had every day since basic training nearly 4 decades ago. The cold had curled into his joints during the night. When he tried to sit up, a sharp bolt of pain shot down his lower back. He clenched his jaw and forced himself to move, because that's what soldiers did. You moved, no matter what. He made his way to the public restroom near the park, washed his face with cold water, brushed his teeth, folded his few possessions back into the duffel with military precision. Even with no one watching, discipline mattered. He didn't see the way people had begun to look at him differently. Not yet. Across town, the same cafe that had rejected him was already humming with morning rituals. The barista, the same one who had forced Raymond out, was arranging chairs outside, earbuds in, whistling a careless tune. He hadn't spared a second thought for the man he'd humiliated. In his world, it had been just another uncomfortable moment, forgotten, but not by everyone. At precisely 8:00 a.m., the cafe's windows began to tremble. A low rumble echoed down the street, then another and another. One by one, 5 military transport trucks turned onto the block. They came from opposite ends, parking in tight formation, blocking traffic entirely, diesel engines idling like beasts holding their breath. Pedestrians stopped. Inside the cafe, patrons gathered at the windows. Phones rose, eyebrows lifted. Then the doors opened. Veterans began stepping down, some in desert camouflage from Iraq and Afghanistan, others in faded battle dress from earlier conflicts. No two uniforms were identical, but each bore marks of service, patches, insignia, ribbons. Lives wore on fabric, histories no one had asked about until now. And they came in numbers. 50 of them, at least, men and women, young and old, limping, walking tall, shoulders squared by something unbreakable. At the front of the formation walked a woman with silver streaks in her dark hair, pulled into a no-nonsense bun, Lieutenant Colonel Carla Rodriguez. She hadn't worn her rank in 10 years, but no one questioned her authority as she barked a single word. Form, and they did like they'd never left the field. 2 lines, perfect formation, boots firm on concrete, eyes steady ahead. Inside the cafe, the barista stared. Coffee pot paused mid-pour. One of the servers whispered, "Is this a protest?" It was more than that. Raymond had heard the rumble from the park. He approached slowly, uncertain, drawn by instinct more than understanding. As he rounded the corner, he froze. He recognized faces. David Harrison stood front and center, his right pant leg hanging loosely over a high-tech prosthetic. Beside him, Marcus Flynn, once a medic with hands steadier than any surgeon's, nodded at Raymond like no time had passed. Charlie stood just behind them, back straighter than it had been in years. Colonel Rodriguez stepped forward. She turned to the gathering crowd, now silent, recording, watching. Yesterday, she said clearly, a man was humiliated at this establishment because of how he looked, because of what people assumed. She pointed. That man is Sergeant First Class Raymond Miller, combat leader, Alpha 9 Rescue Team, 10th Mountain Division. Murmurs rippled. Cameras zoomed in. Rodriguez's voice rose, her cadence firm, unrelenting. This cafe turned away a man who once carried 4 wounded soldiers through enemy fire after an IED explosion disabled their transport. A man who refused medical evacuation until every one of his team was safe. A man who returned home with injuries no one could see, but which never stopped hurting. 2 veterans stepped forward, carrying a wooden sign. They planted it directly in front of the cafe door. This place refused a hero. Inside, the barista had gone pale. He stumbled outside, hands shaking, voice weak. I didn't know, he stammered. He didn't say anything. How was I supposed to know? Colonel Rodriguez looked at him, gaze unblinking. That's the point. The real ones never say anything. They don't wear their medals on their sleeves. They carry them in silence. Raymond hesitated before stepping forward. The sea of veterans parted instantly to let him through. He limped past faces he hadn't seen in years, faces that had once bled beside him, prayed beside him, bled for him. He looked to Rodriguez. "This isn't necessary," he said quietly. "I'm not worth all this trouble." Her voice dropped an octave, meant for him but loud enough for all to hear. "You don't get to decide your worth to us, Sergeant." The barista stepped closer. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know if I..." Raymond held up a hand. "Don't apologize to me. Apologize for the uniform. Apologize to everyone who's ever worn it, whether you saw them or not." David Harrison stepped forward. "Sergeant Miller saved my life. I was 20 years old, bleeding out in the mountains. He carried me 2 miles with a broken back. Then he went back for the others." One by one, veterans stepped out of formation. Each spoke, not all about Raymond, but all about each other. About being overlooked, forgotten, dismissed. About how no one sees you when the uniform comes off. Inside, the cafe's manager frantically removed the "no shirt, no service" sign. He stepped out with trays of free coffee. Rodriguez declined with a small, firm shake of her head. "We didn't come for coffee," she said. "We came because when one of us is disrespected, all of us are. And because too many of our brothers and sisters have been made invisible after the war ends." At noon, the trucks pulled away. The block reopened, but something had shifted. Raymond stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by people who refused to let him disappear. His duffel bag was lifted gently into David's car. Plans were made, retrieving what few items he had in storage and arranging for housing. He didn't want help, but help had arrived anyway. And online, the narrative flipped. The viral video that had mocked him was drowned out by footage of the response. Hashtags flooding the feed. "Respect the uniform. Invisible no more. He is the flag." The man who was kicked out had become something else. Not a symbol of pity, but proof that dignity endures, even when the world turns its face away. 1 week later, the cafe looked the same, but it no longer felt the same. The bright wooden counters had been scrubbed. The chalkboard menu featured the usual $7.00 lattes and oat milk macchiatos. The soft indie music still played overhead. But something invisible had shifted, like the air after a thunderstorm. A new sign now hung in the front window. "Respect all, ask before you judge." The staff wore black t-shirts with the same message printed in clean white block letters. Below the counter, a small plaque read, "Veterans and first responders, always welcome, 25% off every day." They'd hired a diversity consultant, the staff had attended sensitivity training, a new manager had even been brought in from another district, and though most customers ordered their drinks without noticing, a handful glanced at the corner table by the window, the table where Raymond Miller had once been told he didn't belong. That table never sat empty anymore. Each morning, a group of veterans from different wars, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan, gathered there. They ordered coffee, sat in silence, and sometimes swapped stories. They didn't talk about what happened. They didn't have to. Their presence spoke for them. The original barista, young, overwhelmed, and still learning the difference between policy and humanity, was still there, but he moved differently now, slower, more careful, not just out of guilt, but out of a quiet respect that no training session could ever teach.